Hello and welcome, dear students, to this lecture. I am Vijaya Ekka, and today I will be discussing the short story Eveline. In this lecture, I will be giving short background about the author and the short story before we look in detail and analyze the short story. So let's begin. The author of the short story Eveline is James Joyce. James Joyce was born in 1882 and died in 1941. He was an Irish novelist, short story writer, poet, teacher, and a literary critic. He is regarded as one of the most influential and important authors of the 20th century. Joyce is best known for Ulysses, a landmark work in which the episodes of Homer's Odyssey are paralleled in a variety of literary styles. He is also famous for his stream of consciousness technique of writing. His other works are Dubliners, which was published in 1914, the novels A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and Finnegan's Wake. It is also important to understand the times and the background of the short story during which James Joyce had written. Joyce was born in Dublin into a middle class family. Dublin had been the second city of the British Isles and one of the 10 largest cities in Europe. But later in the century, Belfast had outstripped her as the great city of Ireland, and the economy of Dublin was in shambles. Eveline is one of the 15 short stories of Dublin life that forms the collection of the short story Dubliners. It was first published in 1914. Eveline is a story of a 19-year-old girl who struggles with poverty and the difficulties of supporting her family. Her means of escape is a sailor named Frank, who promises her a new life in Buenos Aires. At the end of the story, however, she is too frightened to leave Dublin. Eveline Hill, a 19-year-old woman, works in a Dublin shop. She sits inside her family's house recalling her early childhood, including some happy memories, as well as her father's drunken brutality to her and to her siblings. Eveline thinks about people she has known who have either left Ireland, a priest who has traveled to Melbourne, for example, or have died, her mother and her brother Ernest, and of her own plans to leave the country with a man named Frank. She recalls meeting Frank, an Irish sailor now living in Argentina, and dating him while he visited Dublin on vacation. Eveline also thinks about her father's disapproval of Frank and of her promise to keep the home together as long as she could before her mother grew deranged and died. Later, gripped by fear of the unknown and probably killed as well, Eveline finds herself unable to board the ferry to England, where she and Frank are scheduled to meet a ship bound for South America. He leaves without her. As we know that Eveline is one of the short story from the collection of short stories called Dubliners, we must also understand the themes and setting of Dubliners for the better understanding of the short story. The setting of Dubliners is logically in and around the city of Dublin, Ireland. Unlike England and the Netherlands, it had never been a trade hub, nor in contrast to Germany was Ireland yet industrialized. It was a kind of third world nation. Remember, this was during the year of 1914. It was a period of the First World War. Next, we look into the themes. The stories of Dubliners are united by the city itself. The other aspect that unites these disparate works of narrative prose is shared themes. All these stories are united by the ideas that tales dramatize paralysis, corruption, and death. In the stories, characters fail to move forward, tending rather to forge outward and then retreat, or else circle endlessly. They are stuck in one place. Evelyn is yet another Dubliner's tale of paralysis. As she stands at the end of the pier, frozen in place by fear and guilt, she wants to leave Ireland, but she quite literally cannot move, speak, or even express emotion on her face. Another theme is of death. Death pervades Evelyn too. The deaths of her mother and her brother Ernest, and of a girlhood friend named Dizzy Dunn. And of course, Evelyn fears her own death. He would drown her. She thinks of Frank, defying logic. Perhaps she unconsciously associates her fiancé with the other man in her life, her brutal father. Now let us look at various instances from the story which relates to the themes of paralysis, death, fear and guilt. Evelyn's dockside paralysis is preceded by a prayer to God to direct her, to show her what was her duty. She was thinking about the duty towards her father and the promise which she had made to her mother before she died, that she would keep the family together as long as she could. At the end of the story, we see Evelyn unable to make her decision. She feels as if a bell was clinging upon her heart, as Frank grasps her hand in vain at the story's end. Next, Evelyn seeks Argentina, a place where she hopes to avoid the real threat of her father's violence, as well as her dead mother's life of commonplace sacrifices closing in final craziness. Before her mother died, her mother went into derangement. She kind of became mad. And that is what Evelyn tries to give up. She does not want her mother's insecure and deranged life, or dreadful life, or dreary life. She wants to have excitement and adventure in her life, and that is why she kinds of seeks Argentina, a place of escape. She thinks that in Argentina people would treat her with respect. She thinks about her married life with Frank in Argentina, but it is all a failed quest. Next, Evelyn believes that she has the right to happiness. That is, until she stands on the shore and confronts the reality of the journey on which she is about to embark. Then fear and guilt about abandoning her father and her younger sibling, Harry, overwhelms her, and she stays rather than goes. Though it is as old and dusty as her father's house, She looked round the room, reviewing all her familiar objects, which she had dusted once a week for so many years, wondering where on earth all the dust came from. Meaning, at least for Evelyn, Dublin was a familiar place, and Argentina would have been an unknown country, an unknown city. She would not have made herself comfortable or accustomed to the new lifestyle or the changes in her lifestyle. And here in Dublin, looking at her father, looking after the house, doing her job as a shopkeeper at a Dublin store was all familiar. It was her familiar life. And that is why she decides to stay on and she does not leave for Argentina. That is all on the short story, Evelyn. Hope I have been able to explain the chapter through the many themes which are dominant in the story. Thank you and stay safe.